So, your boy is back. To make a long story short, I didn't want to make videos for the past few months, and now I do. So, weekly videos and weekly live streams are back. This video is all about horror movies that you should watch this Halloween season. I wanted to make this list easily accessible, so I kept it to movies that you can find on one of the major streaming platforms. I didn't want you guys to have to pay for each movie individually or dig up old DVDs. It's 2021, folks. So I'm going to start at number 10 and work my way to number 1. At number 10, we're going to start with the classic, and that's Return of the Living Dead. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this movie before, but those who haven't, it's not really a scary movie at all. It's a zombie movie that doesn't take itself serious. But it's not a horror comedy where the whole thing is just a joke. No. It does have a serious plot, which is basically the two main characters, Frank and Freddy, work in a warehouse, and they accidentally leak a military gas that spreads to the surrounding area. The gas, how'd you guess, makes the dead come to life as zombies. So the entire movie is about how a relatively small group of people handle this grave situation that they're in the middle of. The whole thing is unapologetically 80s with the soundtrack, the costume design and props, and of course, the acting. This is one of my all-time favorite spooky movies that I have to watch every year because of how 80s it is, and the plot is actually really good. If you do enjoy this movie, they did make a sequel with Return of the Living Dead Part 2, which I enjoyed just as much as the first title. So at number 10, Return of the Living Dead. For number 9, I had to put Netflix's newest horror flick, There's Someone Inside Your House. This is a modern-day teenage slasher, which is a horror subgenre that Netflix seems to really be trying to bring back. The general plot of this movie is a masked killer terrorizes a small-town high school by killing kids one by one as the entire student body tries to figure out who the killer is. It stars a bunch of actors that you probably won't recognize. I know I sure didn't, and I thought they all did an excellent job. This movie does not have good ratings at all, but I enjoyed it. A large part of the story is exposing the darkest secrets that these teenagers have, whether those secrets are in the past or present. And I thought it was a great way of making a modern day slasher work because being exposed is the most horrifying 2021 thing there is. I do think the name of the movie is a bit misleading, but that's neither here nor there. Overall, this is an entertaining 90-minute slasher that is great for Halloween 2021. At number 8, we're going back to the 80s again. My Bloody Valentine is an old slasher that has the same stalker murderer vibe that Friday the 13th and Halloween have. The plot is about a miner who was killed in a mining accident due to a bunch of his fellow miners forgetting he was in the mine because they're at a Valentine's Day party. A lot of mines. That miner came back to haunt the town every Valentine's Day. The way I've explained it there is not it sounds really dumb. I just saw this for the first time a couple weeks ago and I highly enjoyed it. Like I mentioned before, it's a slasher that's just like Friday the 13th and Halloween, but you don't hear about this title nearly as much as you hear about those two. But if 80s slashers are your thing, where a bunch of young adults are hunted down and killed one by one, My Bloody Valentine will be right up your alley. Now I could have listed the entire Fear Street series at this spot, but I wanted to limit this list to individual titles only. So part 1 is supposed to be on the same vibe as a 90s horror movie, similar to the likes of Scream, but what Fear Street does is combine horror elements from different decades and mix them all into this series. Part 1 tries to be as 90s as it can, but it doesn't really feel like a 90s horror movie. Let's just get that out of the way now. But it's still a really good horror movie primarily because of the story. Fear Street is all about a town named Shadyside that has been terrorized by a chain of murders, and the main characters find out that these murders have a link to their town's ancient history. The Fear Street series is a must-watch this Halloween, so get started with part 1. Number 6 is the Italian horror flick, A Classic Horror Story. You will have to read some subtitles in this one, which I usually can't stand subtitles, but it was worth it for this movie. Also, there's a good amount of English throughout this movie, so it's not entirely subtitled. The plot of this movie is a group of people are all essentially ride-sharing a road trip as they all try to reach their different destinations. On the way, they run into some trouble and end up in this house of horrors where they have to try and survive. Now, throughout the movie, you will start to realize that everything is not what it seems, and I'll leave it at that. but I highly enjoyed this title. It's got a bunch of mixed reviews and doesn't have a very good rating, but I really like it. It's very violent and has no shortage of gore, and the story keeps you guessing throughout most of the movie. Because of that, I've heard people nickname this movie the Italian Midsummer, which it's definitely similar, but not really at the same time. At first, it seems like the plot is just as convoluted as Midsummer, but eventually you'll realize that it's actually extremely straightforward. If you did enjoy Midsummer, you'll probably enjoy this title, except the ending is much more satisfying than Midsummer's ending. Vivarium is probably closer to a psychological thriller than it is to a horror movie. It's about a young couple looking to buy a house and end up in a neighborhood that is impossible to leave. Vivarium really harps on the feeling of panic as well as hopelessness. This is another title that keeps you guessing throughout most of the movie. It's really creepy at certain points, and I'm not claustrophobic at all, but for some reason, this movie gave me a suffocating, cramped feeling throughout a lot of it. The last 30 minutes is absolute madness and will most definitely have you on the edge of your seat. Vivarium has to be the creepiest movie on this list. If Vivarium is a mix of psychological thriller and horror, The Lodge is most definitely a straight psychological thriller. This movie is really messed up. The story is about a brother and sister who have to spend a few days in the wintertime in a lodge with their dad's girlfriend who they know little to nothing about. When the power suddenly goes out, that's when things go sideways. And I mean side. The Lodge features a story that really focuses on religion and complete psychological warfare. It's another movie that keeps you guessing until the end, and the last 30 minutes is complete madness. Can you tell the type of thriller and horror movies I like the most? To me, The Lodge is an extremely important movie to watch, Halloween or not. I don't want to give away what the spin is because I know I love to figure that out on my own, but this movie questions faith in an experimental way, and you just have to watch it. You just gotta watch it. If this wasn't a list focused on horror, this is by far the best movie out of all 10 titles. But because it is based on horror, I couldn't put it at number 1 because The Lodge really isn't a horror movie. It's kind of scary, but it really gets its creepiness from how sensitive of a topic it focuses on. Yeah, you had to know the new Halloween was gonna be on this list. This is the second of the 3 movies in this Halloween reboot, and as of right now, after only seeing it once, I don't like it as much as the previous movie from 2018. However, if you're a horror fan, you of course have to check out the newest addition to this staple of horror films. If you've seen the trailers, you know it picks up right where the previous movie left off. Halloween Kills is all about the neighborhood banding together to bring the fight to Michael Myers instead of the other way around like we're used to. But I gotta say, I was pretty disappointed with how the community went about going after Michael Myers. Now I know they have to make sure this new aspect plays into the naive manner that characters basically have to have in horror movies, but come on. I'm not gonna spoil anything, but I will say that they could have made the game plan of the neighborhood watch a bit more solid than what it was in this movie. There's a couple sad scenes in this movie, one really sad scene that is extremely realistic. Never thought I'd say that about a Halloween movie, but I mentioned all that to say Halloween Kills didn't quite feel like a traditional Halloween movie. I was slightly disappointed with it. I would have most definitely enjoyed it more had I watched it in theaters, but hey, I had high expectations for this. With the third and final movie that's supposed to finish this reboot, Halloween Ends, already slated, as you can imagine, Halloween Kills ends on a cliffhanger. And this cliffhanger is... All in all, like I mentioned before, Halloween Kills is still worth the watch for the simple fact that it's Halloween. If you can see it in theaters, I'd recommend it because it would probably make the movie more enjoyable, but Michael Myers was of course going to be pretty high up on the must-watch horror list of 2021. At number 2, I put His House. His House is about a couple from Sudan who moved to the UK as refugees. Since they're refugees, they get placed in a not-so-great house, and you watch them try to restart their lives from scratch. However, you quickly find out that the house is not so great for more than just the looks. This is a haunting horror movie, which is definitely a played-out subgenre, but this brings a breath of fresh air to haunting movies because it's usually white people featured in these haunting movies, which makes sense because we all know only white people would be getting caught up in this stupid shit, but it does offer a much different perspective because not only does this movie feature a black couple, but they're not even African American. They're Sudanese living in England. So it's a drastically different take on what we're used to from this type of horror movie. The past of the main characters plays a huge role in the story. What happened to them back in Sudan is what drives the entire plot at its core. Its realistic take on the situation at hand straps you into a roller coaster ride, making you feel sad, angry, hopeless, and sympathetic. His House draws a few parallels to Vivarium, a couple essentially trapped in a house. This is easily the scariest movie on this entire list, so if you're looking for a legit scare, not just something spooky or creepy, His House is the movie for you. Number 1 had to be Fear Street Part 3, 1666, the final movie in the Fear Street series. Part 1 is very good, Part 2 is legit just Friday the 13th, so I didn't even bother putting it on this list, but Part 3 is great. It goes back to the year 1666 to fully explain the dark, ancient history of Shadyside, and then it comes back to the 90s where Part 1 left you hanging to tie everything together and bring the story to an end. You find out the real reason why this town is so twisted, and it's absolutely crazy. The storyline in this movie is extremely well done and has you on the edge of your seat, dying to find out what really happened back in 1666. Then you're brought back to the 90s to see how it all ends. And besides the 1666 storyline, that's what makes Part 3 so great. It's a prequel and a sequel in one movie. You should still probably watch Part 2 because if not, Part 3 won't make complete sense. But I'm just letting you know, Part 2 is basically the first few Friday the 13th movies. But Fear Street Part 3 is the number 1 movie you have to watch this Halloween. If you made it all the way to this point of the video, thank you for watching the whole thing. Let me know in the comments what are your must-watch spooky movies this Halloween. I'll see how many of them I've already seen and what I thought about them. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like as it helps this channel grow. Subscribe so you can see my new live streams and my new video next week. I'll see you all tonight from Animal Kingdom in Epcot. Yeah, we'll be streaming from there tonight, so yeah. Take care.